The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back, in case you're wondering, with George Case. And we've got a panel of folks today to talk to George. Ronnie Rabinovitz is here with a guest. David Hubler's here.
Hello.
Lumpkin's here. I'm here, Ralph Tyko from the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and, of course, the man himself, George Case. How are you, George?
Hey, I'm just fine. I'm looking forward to this discussion. So, Ronnie, if you'll take over, that'd be great. We're about ready to have a very interesting podcast.
Great. Well, I'd like to introduce Renee James. She's a friend of mine.
Hi, everybody.
She is a producer of the Shoeless Joe Productions, and it's a very interesting story. And Renee, I'd love you to explain it all and tell us all what you're doing. It's very exciting.
Okay.
Welcome to the
thank
show.
You, Ron. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, it's a really exciting project we've got going on. And actually, this has been a labor of love for the past 10 years. I've been working on this since I first had the idea. It's been, up and down, and we've gotten onto a steady climb. All of a sudden, we are just ready to go at this full force, and we've gotten a lot of interest from the people out there. Happy to hear that there's so much interest still in Shoeless Joe Jackson.
So tell us how it all started.
Well, it's an interesting story, kind of a story of kismet here. I was actually working a film festival out in Palm Springs with an actor that I used to manage, and we had breakfast that morning with a couple of other old film stars, and we were talking about our childhood crushes. And my childhood crush was Boris Karloff, believe it or not. And they all had exactly. They all had a good laugh at that. And just, again, the happenstance, you never know what's going to happen in life. We did the show, and all show long, the tables were curtained off, so you couldn't tell what star was on either side of you. And I was talking to a little gentleman on the left of me, and just peeking through the curtain all day, talking with him. And at the end of the show, I went around to the front of the table to introduce myself, and on the table is all Boris Karloff pictures. And I look up, and I said, "You're not going to believe this. I was just talking about him this morning, that he was my crush." And Sarah Karloff, his daughter, was there.
Oh, my.
And she had a couple visiting her from Texas. And one of the people with her happened to be from my hometown, right next door to my hometown, which is also adjacent to Joe Jackson's hometown of Greenville, South Carolina. So we were all, coincidentally, and the actor that I was with, we were all from within a 10-mile radius of one another. And I thought that was interesting, and I struck up conversation with the gentleman from Texas who was, his wife was from Honea Path, South Carolina. And he started talking to me about Joe Jackson. And, of course, I knew the name, but I didn't know much of anything about him at the time. But for some reason, it just intrigued me, and I couldn't let it go. And I went home, and I looked up Shoeless Joe Jackson, and I just couldn't get enough of the story. So the more I read, the more I just couldn't believe that no one had told his story, from his perspective. You read a lot of, the Black Sox scandal and the 8 Men Out, but no one had told Joe's story from his side. And I thought that was a grave injustice, and I felt that a lot of the public really, they get a lot of their information from old movies, but a lot of the facts are incorrect, and a lot of the facts aren't told. So I just felt compelled to do this story, and I let it brew for a while, and I kept thinking, it's got to be told. And one day, my actor had called me from California throwing a hissy fit because he didn't get invited to our hometown dinner, and another actor from our hometown had been given a dinner by the mayor of our tiny town of Greenwood, South Carolina. And I said, relax, I'll handle it. And so I called the town that my actor was born in, Greenville, South Carolina, which is where Joe was from. And I called the mayor's office, and I said, listen, managing this actor. Would you consider giving him a day? And the mayor's assistant was on the line, and she said, we'd love to. We didn't know he was from this town. And we've got a lot of famous people from this town. Joe Jackson, the ball player's from here. And I said, absolutely, I know that. I'm toying around with the idea. This is 10 years ago. I'm toying around with the idea of doing his life story. And the phone just went silent. And the mayor's assistant came back on, and she was just stymied. And she finally said, I'm the curator of the Shoeless Joe Jackson Museum. And so from that point on, I knew that it was just, like I said, it was kismet. It was meant to be. And so from that point on, I went at this with my whole heart and been working on it ever since.
That's wonderful.
May I interrupt and have George or David put Shoeless Joe Jackson's baseball career, notwithstanding the betting thing and the scandal, into perspective? He was a great player. Who were some of those that he compared with favorably in playing ability?
This is George Case, Ralph, and Renee. I just wanted to mention when you talk about that, Ted Williams, who many say was the greatest hitter of all time, always talked about the greatness of Joe Jackson as a hitter. And
yes, he was a big proponent of Joe.
Right, and I just wanted to mention that because my dad and Ted, as we've talked about before, and you might not know it, but Ted and my dad were contemporaries. They played against one another, and I knew of the Joe Jackson story from a very early age, hearing my dad talk about Ted talking about Joe Jackson. So I just wanted to mention that. It is well documented about the Black Sox, as you've mentioned, but Joe Jackson is a legendary figure when it comes to baseball playing ability. I think he played at the same time as Ty Cobb and some of the greats during the early 20s. So and the teens, and then I think the Black Sox scandal was 1919. So I think he played in the teens when Cobb and the others were playing. So I did want to mention that I certainly know about the greatness of Joe Jackson as a baseball player.
Oh, well, that's wonderful.
Let me ask Al Blumpkin, our resident maven, and give me some Joe Jackson stuff, Al, that would enlighten us.
Okay, you got his autograph once, didn't you? No, very few of those lying around. He came up with the A's originally, and he couldn't adjust to the big city, so he left the. He left the team and he went back, and eventually they traded him to Cleveland, where he had his first. Connie Mack got rid of him because he couldn't contribute play with the A's, and he had his first really big years were in Cleveland, and he could have played his whole career out there, but Ben Johnson arranged a trade where I think it was 1915. May have been because of the Federal League War that was going on at that point, and arranged a trade to send Joe to the White Sox for a nondescript outfielder named Brago Roth, who didn't last very long, and that's how he wound up on the White Sox. But also Babe Ruth had tremendously high praise for Jackson as a hitter, and said to a large extent he followed Jackson's principles. Of course, when lively ball came, Ruth became a home run hitter, and Jackson in his last major league season hit .382. He had no problem adjusting to the live ball, and he would have been a lock for the Hall of Fame had he been allowed to continue.
Wow.
Okay.
Interesting.
David, any memories of?
No, I'm sorry to say. No, that's a little before my time. But also, I only know what I've read or seen in the movies, that sort of thing.
Okay, Renee, would you tell us something about him? Again, not related to betting, that we might not know about him in his personal life.
Well, I think one of the key components in his life is that he had to go to work as a child, around 6 or 7 years old, in a textile mill to help his family pay the bills. He was never able to attend school. He had some siblings that went on to school because of, his helping with the finances for the family working in the cotton mill. And he would work long hours, 10 to 16-hour days. Back then they didn't have the child labor laws. And, that really impacted his life greatly, I think. He was never able to get that education. He wasn't able to read or write. And I do think that affected him in a lot of his decisions. But also growing up down south, I grew up in the South as well. And it's a small world down there. It's a very enclosed community. And, he wasn't a worldly man. And he kind of, he met his wife. He married her when I think she was 14, Katie Jackson. And she was really his right arm. She did everything for him, including signing his autographs, as you may know. But he really depended on her. And so when Connie Maxwell took him, out of his home state, it also took him out of his comfort zone. And where he was not an ignorant man, he was not very worldly. So, he kind of, he got teased by his players. And, there was a story that I think is very key, that when he was in Cleveland playing for the Indians, playing for, I believe it was the Reds back then, right? The Cleveland Reds?
Indians.
The Indians, okay.
Yeah.
He had gone to dinner with all his teammates, and they thought it was great fun to tell Joe that the little bowl of hot water that you washed your hands in was soup. And Joe didn't know any better, so he was drinking this bowl of dirty water. And, that he really relied on his teammates at that point in time. So I think that also figures into the scandal. He did not participate in the meetings for the fix that was in, and a lot of people think that he was in on those meetings. He was not. He was kind of thrown into it because his teammate, Lefty Williams, used his name when he approached the gamblers and said, we can get Joe Jackson in on this. So a lot of people think that he was in on it from the start, but he was just brought the money. It was dropped in his room, and he was basically told, the fix is on, you're in or you're out, play to win or don't, but it's going to happen, and you might as well take the money. And when Joe, said he wasn't happy with that at all, he was very upset with his roommate. He said, I don't want any part of this. And they basically told him, if you know what's good for you, you keep your mouth shut. So he was also threatened by his teammates, and, he was afraid of the gamblers, and he was really in a situation, a no-win situation with that. And he did go to Alfred Austrian, the legal advisor for Comiskey, and to Charles Comiskey, and, said, I was given this money. What do I do? They're talking about a fix. And Austrian and Comiskey both said, just don't say anything, hold on to the money until, we figured this out. And Joe did hold on to the money. He didn't go spend it. He put it in a bank account. It sat there for months and months and months. And, finally he got to the point he knew that nothing was going to be done. Comiskey wasn't going to do anything with this. And his sister needed surgery. So that's at the point in time that he did use the money to pay for her surgery. So, I think a lot of people think this story is very cut and dry, that he was in on it. But he did play to win. And in the testimony for the trial, when the judge asked him, did you play to win? He said, yes, I did. I played to win.
Now, he wasn't convicted in a court of law, but Judge Landis suspended these guys without that being necessary. Why was that never overturned over the years?
Well, he had a civil trial. He did have a civil trial. I think the following year, in 1920, he had taken them to court for back pay. And, I think that Landis had such omnipotent power, and he was held in such high regard. And when he took the job, they had originally sought to have a baseball commission with several commissioners. And Landis came back and said, look, baseball is in jeopardy, and you need to let me come in and clean up, and I don't want anybody else making decisions with me. I want total power. And so they agreed because they were all afraid that, the game of baseball was going to be in jeopardy. And, Judge Landis had his own agenda, in my opinion, and he put down the iron fist, and that was that.
I'll ask Al Blumkin this. How come Judge Landis, never put down that iron fist against Cobb and Speaker?
Well, he used he used the excuse that happened. That was supposed to be about games in 1916, when the Cobb Speaker thing broke. There was a letter by a disgruntled former pitcher named Hubler saying that Cobb and Speaker conspired to fix games either in 1916, 1917, or 1918. And Landis didn't want to, at that point, he didn't want to rob the game of the two. Speaker was managing Cleveland, and Cobb was managing Detroit. So he said that this happened before he got involved. He didn't want to do it, but both Speaker and Cobb were removed from their managerial positions, and they were both player managers, and they both wound up, Speaker went to Washington in 27, and Cobb went to the A's, and Speaker joined Cobb for their last season in 1928, but he didn't want to, get any more criticism than what came down from certain decisions that he had made over the years, not including the Black Sox, but the suspension of Babe Ruth for the first month of 1922 because he barnstormed after the 1921 World Series, and certain other cases that he had to where he banned players for one reason or another.
Okay, was he a man to go back on his decisions when he was
Landis? No, and supposedly when he was a judge, his big fame was fining, I think it was Standard Oil, something like $30 million, and then of course it was overturned on appeal. He had he was overturned on appeal when he was a federal judge quite often.
I think that was one of the things that appealed to the baseball owners in hiring Landis.
Yeah, and what they had before him was a three-headed commission between the league presidents and the Cincinnati Reds owner, Gary Herman. And Van Johnson was one of the three participants in this, and Van Johnson had created real enemies. In fact, there was a move that the Yankees, Red Sox, and White Sox would jump to the National League, and the National League would find someplace there, 12th team, that would have ruined the whole two-league setup if Johnson had stayed in that post. And so when Landis, as in the movie, says they wanted to limit Landis to a certain term, he said life.
Huh.
So at that point they gave in. Of course, since then they haven't had a commissioner in place since Landis that had anywhere close to absolute authority. But at that point they had to do that, and it lasted basically until Landis passed away at the end of 1924.
Right. Now, Renee, this George case, I'm curious. I heard you talk about the, your production, and I'm curious. Are you using actors, and is this like a documentary, or how are you setting it up? As far as I'm assuming you're not really talking about his baseball playing days, but his life. So how did you set the whole storyline?
Well, it's not going to be a documentary. It will be a full-length feature film, and you're correct. It's based on his life. Of course, we'll go into his baseball days, but it will, encompass his entire life from, a young boy into his older years when he worked as he owned a liquor store in his hometown of South Carolina.
Right, I was going to mention that liquor store. I thought that's where he did have that business at the end of his life, right?
That's right. There's actually an interesting story where Ty Cobb visited him there. I don't know if you've heard the story or not, but Joe was, long retired, and a gentleman came into his liquor store one day, and he was just kind of milling around and wasn't making conversation, and Joe just went about his business, and eventually this gentleman, grabbed a bottle of booze and put it on the counter, and Joe rang him out, and Ty Cobb looked at him and he said, "Joe, you don't know who I am, do you?" And Joe looked at him and he said, "Yeah, I knew who you were. I know who you are, but I didn't know if you wanted to know who I was." And that's a key moment, I think, in his life.
In his mindset, he must have had some sort of guilt, even though he knew he was innocent. There must be some sort.
Go ahead. Talking to his family and all the reading I've done, he really didn't have guilt. He felt like he did everything that he could do to win that game, and to his death, he claimed his innocence, and even on his deathbed, he apparently told one of his relatives, only God can judge me. And so I don't think he had guilt, and he actually had a happy life in his older years. But, I want to get back to your first question regarding the actors. We're going to be looking for, the key player of Joe. We have someone in mind that is a Southern actor, and he's also a great ball player. But for most of the players, we're going to be looking for ball players first and actors second, because, I think everyone can learn to act, but not everyone can be a good ball player. And I think that was a mistake in some previous movies that, they took the opposite approach.
I happen to agree with you. I happen to agree with you wholeheartedly on that, Renee, because my bias against baseball movies, by and large, except for a few, was that many of the actors are just not ball players, and it's hard to imagine and hard to believe that some actor, in other words, I always use the example of Tony Perkins in Fear Strikes Out. I mean, he was the most unathletic person I've ever seen in a film, great actor, right. But they had him trying to portray Jimmy Pearsall, which to me was just absolutely ludicrous. So, I'm glad to hear what you're saying about hiring the actors who have some baseball ability, portraying them as ball players.
Right. Well, didn't Kevin Costner was supposedly a pretty fair ball player himself?
Yes, Costner was. He was an example, David. He was an excellent. He played ball at Fullerton State in California, and if you've seen his movies, you can tell. I mean, his portrayal in Bull Durham and his portrayal in For Love of the Game, and of course, it was a fantasy, but in Field of Dreams, I mean, he just moved and acted and knew about being a baseball player because he was a baseball player.
I put Tom Selleck in that category.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ralph. He portrayed, I think it was, in a Detroit Tigers movie, I believe. And, Selleck he was a former athlete and he moved like a ball player. And so you could believe that. But in some of the portrayals that I've seen, it's just so far removed from, reality that for me, I just lose interest. I don't like it. Some of the movies are just very poorly done when it comes to the ball playing scene. So Renee, I'm certainly, happy to hear how you're going to handle that. And I think it's the right path that you're on.
Hey, Renee, you'd be well served to talk to George Case about assuring realism in your movie.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Get in touch with him. He's on Facebook, and you'd also be well served if you're looking for an announcer. Listen to this. Nobody.
I like it.
I don't think.
Yeah. Joe.
He had a great. He had a great long career, but I think he didn't come along with Joe Jackson. Unless he had a megaphone. In those days,
they had a megaphone. That's right.
Yeah.
David, they had a megaphone.
Yeah, only a megaphone, right? You know.
Right.
Well, one of the records that Babe Ruth has is most bad movies made about a ball player, and it's 3.
Oh, I agree with you. You know, and you know, as far as acting, that's one component, but you know, we have to look at movies that are 20 years and older when it comes. Excuse my dog barking in the background. When it comes to the factual matter, I have to kind of excuse him a little bit because we didn't have access to the internet in those days, and even with Joe's story, when it was approached before, as the whole 8 men that were banned from baseball, we also didn't have, as far as Joe's concerned, we didn't have, like his deposition that went missing for many, many decades. And, I was lucky enough that Peter Alter at the Chicago History Museum allowed me to come in, and I was fortunate enough to be one of the first people to view those documents. And, just reading the private detective reports, Alfred Austrian had, Comiskey had private detectives follow these players around for a long time. And just reading those reports is very interesting. It kind of sheds light on the players and their state of well-being at the time. And
was he the kind of guy you'd like to have to dinner?
I'm sorry?
Would you have him in your house? Would you introduce him to your family?
Are you speaking about Joe Jackson?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. What I wouldn't have given to have met him. I have spoken with people who knew him. Actually, the late Joe Anders. He was a good ball player himself, and Joe taught him as a youngster how to properly bat. And so he's filled me in. Before his death, I had some long interviews with him and long conversations, and he's filled me in on the type of man that Joe truly was. And I've never heard anyone that has had some kind of direct contact with him, his family, to pass along the stories. I haven't had anyone say anything bad about him.
I have a question. I mean, you say that, and most of us know that he couldn't read or write, and I think that was part of the reason he got his nickname, because he came from this sort of real Southern, illiterate kind of background. But how did he happen to be able to run a liquor store when he couldn't read labels or add or subtract? No computers, of course, in those days.
That's a good question. Well, first of all, to the first part of that, he actually got his name, I think it was Scoop Latimer. He was a reporter back in the day for the Greenville, I think it was the Greenville Post. I don't think it was the Greenville News back then. But he had been given a new pair of cleats, Joe had, and he had, played part of the game with those new cleats, and they rubbed blisters on his feet. And so when it was his turn at bat, he just, he was in pain, so he took the cleats off, and he ran the bases barefoot. And apparently some fan in the stands yelled out, "You shoeless son of a gun." And this reporter, Scoop Latimer, picked up on it and started calling him Shoeless Joe Jackson. So that's how
very interesting.
He got that.
It wasn't because he couldn't afford shoes to get to the ballpark.
Right. And, that was actually a sticking point with him because, he did grow up poor. And if you speak to anyone who's grown up, without means, shoes are a big deal. And later on, when he did have some success, he had quite a collection of shoes, and he had that was one of his favorite things to do when someone would come over. He would show them his shoe collection and say, "See, I've got shoes." So it was a soft point with him for sure. But as far as the question as how he ran the liquor store, as I said before, he really relied on his wife for a lot of his business dealings. But he was no rube. He was a good businessman. He was a very good businessman, and I'm sure he knew monetarily, how to handle that end of the business. But he did rely on Katie very much. So I'm sure she did most of the bookkeeping and, if not all of it.
Renee, between the time that he retired from baseball and the liquor store, I'm sure that didn't just, he didn't retire, he was thrown out.
Right.
I'm sure the liquor store didn't just materialize. Was there struggle along the way? How did he get the bucks together to buy the liquor store? What adversity did he face?
Well, a lot of people think that he played outlaw ball, and he did to an extent, but the ban that Landis imposed on the players was a lifetime ban to play pro ball. So, he did use an alias, I think, a few times, but he played ball down south in Georgia and in South Carolina, I think in a couple of other states as well, under, assumed names and under his own name. He played for other leagues, but he did not play pro ball. Right.
Oh, so he was able to keep his head above water financially, because it was tough times. You're talking the Depression and what have you.
Right.
He was able to keep his head above water. He didn't.
Right.
Okay. That's
and in between seasons when he was playing pro ball, he actually, and I think this isn't very well known, he actually did a vaudeville act. And that was cut short because it was rumored that he was getting a little too friendly with one of the vaudeville dancer girls, and his wife put a stop to that. She actually sent the sheriff from South Carolina to Georgia to go claim him. So he kind of kept in order after that.
Yeah, well,
he didn't mess with Kate.
That was a domestic situation. We don't talk about
yes, but he loved her. He definitely loved her, and she loved him. They were together their entire life until his passing.
Oh, well, that's...
How old was when he died?
I'm sorry?
Renee, how old was he when he died?
I believe it was 62, 63.
63? Okay.
I believe so.
Yes,
too young.
Did they have children, he and his wife?
No, they never had any children.
Okay.
He has a living great nephew who has the same namesake.
Okay, now Renee, I'm going to put it on you. What's the process of making a movie? What are you going through? How do you spend your day in production?
Well, right now we are having just a lot of success. We're very happy that so many people have reached out to us via Facebook. And for your listeners, we would love it if you would go to our Facebook page of Shoeless Joe Productions. Also, they can go to the website at shoelessjoeproductions.com. We have so many people reaching out to us from a lot of the sports news affiliates. A lot of former Major League ball players are reaching out to me. And just getting so much support, and we've only had our Facebook page up for about 25, 26 days, something like that. And, we're over 1,000 followers and likes.
Wow.
So, yeah, I think that's really key because it shows that Joe is still very relevant, and, there are a lot of people still interested in him. And the people who have gotten in touch with me from the sporting world have been so helpful and so supportive. Everyone's offering, how can I help? What can I do? Got a lot of people saying, how can I invest in this? And right now we are just in even though it's been a decade-long process, we're still in kind of the embryonic stage. We have, a long ways to go, but we have a very aggressive timeline because we want to capitalize on that 100-year anniversary of the scandal, which is next year. And we've got some, great people. We've got our writer is Angelo Pizzo, who wrote the movie Rudy and the movie Hoosiers. And I think he'll do his story great justice. And we've got some other big people, interested. David Anspaugh is going to direct it. And I can't say this yet. It's a surprise, but we do have, as our executive producer, an Oscar winner who is also, he's a huge baseball fan, and he started out life in the direction of wanting to be a professional baseball player too, and actually went to spring training with the Cardinals and was hurt. And so he went into acting after that. But he's also an award-winning director and writer as well. And he's going to be a key component, and he's going to bring a lot of interest in because of who he is. And again, I wish I could tell you, but if you go to the webpage,
wishing won't make it so, Renee. Go for it.
No, he's a dear friend of mine, and I pitched this story to him.
Well, I'm a dear friend of yours now. So
well, thank you. I appreciate that. Right. I need all the friends I can get.
Give us a scoop, for crying out loud. This might be the biggest day of our lives.
The biggest hint I can give you is that you can go to the website or the Facebook page, and you'll see a little video there, and it might give you a hint.
All right. That's all we want.
There's a video by a well-known actor that I think you'll get clued in on who it is. I wish I could tell you. I'm dying to tell everybody, but we have to wait till everything's in place. But
Sure.
All right.
We do need that financing on board, so we're going to be getting ready to take on investors in the next week or so. So if any of your listeners are interested, please contact us via Facebook or our website.
Well,
or my number's on the website.
George Case is your man for consulting and investing.
That's wonderful. Does he know this?
Thank you, Ralph. The consulting part was great.
My pleasure, George. Anything I can do.
You speak for your own pocketbook, Ralph.
Yeah, right.
Well, I don't even have a pocketbook, so what can I? I won't say anything.
You fellows might also be interested in, and we're just putting this together. But next fall, we're going to be doing to promote the movie. We're going to be doing a celebrity all-star softball game in Greenville, South Carolina. So
really,
we're going to be looking for a lot of players and announcers and everything for that. So keep posted.
All right.
Great.
Hey, you're charming.
Thank you.
Really wish you luck. Ronnie, thank you for bringing her.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure.
And yes, Ron, thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate you.
Oh, absolutely. You've been terrific.
No, thank you so much. You guys as well.
All right.
Renee has lived in Minneapolis too, so
that's right.
I'll have a chance to see her once in a while. That's right. So
hey,
we'll get together
before we
again.
close, I'd like to go around the room, and if any of you have questions for Renee, I don't want to leave it hanging. So, Al, anything you want to ask?
I think it's very, very fascinating. There's just one thing I want to ask her. One of the biographies I have on the Shoeless Joe said that both Connie Mack and the owner of the Cleveland Indians, whose name escapes me at the moment, both offered Joe the chance to get literate, and he turned them down. I don't know whether that's true or not.
I don't know if that's true or not either, but my guess would be that could be correct. I think that he was so self-conscious about it. I know he was, just from my research. He was very self-conscious about it. And, I know someone who is in the same boat today, believe it or not. And if you get to a certain point in life and you haven't learned, it's such
Renee, you're in the South. You know a lot of people that fall.
Yeah, Charles Somers was the Indian owner.
Just being the world the way it was, and the economy the way it was, that's pretty common, and especially down south. You're right. There was a need for people to contribute to the family income, and unfortunately, it went that way quite often. That people had to make that choice, to send their children to work instead of to school.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Renee, thank you. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thanks
terrific.
All right. Thank you.
Anybody else have any
questions? It was
questions?
a terrific show.
You know, before we go, Ralph and Renee, I just wanted to mention one thing. This might help you with a little bit of background. Possibly you can work it into your storyline. I don't know. But Joe Gedeon was one of the players on that Black Sox team, and Joe Gedeon was implicated, but was not convicted. But on the other hand, it's interesting to note one thing. I have a slight connection to the 1919 Black Sox and Joe Gedeon because his nephew was Elmer Gedeon, who played in 1939 with the Washington Senators, was a teammate of my father's, and was the first Major League ball player to be killed during World War II.
Right.
He was a captain in the Air Force and was shot down over, I think it was France. And but his uncle, Elmer Gedeon's uncle, was Joe Gedeon.
Yeah, I would love to hear more. Please, feel free to contact me. As I said, my personal number is on the website, and I'm very quick about getting back to people. You can also send me an email as well, and my email is on the site as well. I would love to talk more about that.
Yeah, great. George? Well, best of luck to you, because I think it's a wonderful, an opportunity for you and the other people to really talk about the life and times of Shoeless Joe. I think it's just wonderful, and best of luck to you with the production.
Thanks
George?
so much. We really appreciate the support.
George?
Yes.
Gedeon played for the Browns. He wasn't on the White Sox team. He played for the Browns. And he's known also for the third baseman that was ordered to play back when I think he was the one that was ordered to play back in 1910 when Joey got all those bunt hits in that disputed batting race with Cobb. I'm not sure about that one, but he was on the Browns.
Well, what it was, I think, Alan, I might have misspoken. I said teammate. He was
involved.
Very
he was
close
involved
friend of,
tangentially.
I think, Swede Reisberg.
Yeah,
right.
Who was a player.
Right.
Yeah,
and that was probably the connection. So I think you're absolutely right.
He was tangential. He wasn't one of the 8 players.
Right.
He was tangential.
Well, and I should say, too, that Buck Weaver was given a raw deal as
well. Oh, yeah.
And,
right.
I do feel badly about that. But it's just something about the story behind Joe that is very compelling to me. And I think that his illiteracy did play a factor. So that's, I think, why my heart kind of goes to Joe.
Right.
Okay.
Well,
hey, Renee, would you keep coming back?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to keep you posted, and I appreciate
this is fascinating stuff. It's really fascinating stuff. Yeah.
And all of you. I don't want to be remiss, David Hubler, anything you want to ask or add?
No. The one thing besides his baseball career, which was, cut short, it's interesting how many characters how many characters were created in his image, in fiction and in film, because Kinsella's book about the Field of Dreams, it wasn't called the Field of Dreams, there's Shoeless Joe is in that. He certainly was figures prominently in Damn Yankees, the Broadway play. So it's interesting that he, despite what happened to him, his name lives on in literature, and he's an inspiration for many writers.
He's still beloved.
Beloved. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Well, what? He gets a bad rap every time they talk about Pete Rose. They mention Shoeless Joe as if it's an identical situation, and they say, "Well, why don't they put Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame and Shoeless Jackson too?" Or that kind of thing.
Forgive the pun, but it's a totally different ball game. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Does that irk you when you hear that?
It does bother me. They're two separate entities, two separate stories altogether. To me, it's not even a comparison. The only thing that they have in common was the band, and other than that, I don't see the correlation whatsoever.
Okay. Well, you clarified a lot of stuff for us, Renee. This is terrific. And like I say, I can't wait to star in the movie.
Great. Send that headshot. I'll be looking for your headshot and bio.
All right.
No, you don't want a headshot. The bio maybe, but you don't want to see a headshot.
Just to make these guys laugh at least once a show. That's all.
His best view is from the rear. His best side from the rear.
Well, that goes more in the end, as we all know. And it often does, too. But on that note, I'm going to implore everybody listening and ask them, beg them, if you would, please, if you enjoy our offerings, this or any of our offerings, box up some gently used or new children's books. Take them down to the Head Start program. Get in the habit of doing that. These kids need to read. They need to get their noses out of devices and computers. They need to develop a passion. They need to be school ready. And
absolutely,
kids that are in the Head Start program really do, by definition, need a head start. And the Head Start is books and learning. And maybe the future will be in the kids' hands to turn this craziness in this country and this world around. And so if you'll do that for me and everybody here, we'd all appreciate it. In the meantime, you catch me on the big screen, everybody. I will remember everybody. I will acknowledge. I will sign autographs. I'll be the same. I'll be somebody who can say that guy didn't change at all after that movie.
Hey, David, get that megaphone ready for Ralph.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I can provide some comic relief because I told a story. I don't know if Renee knows that I did some comedy work and in the past, and I had a bit in my act, and I use that term loosely, where I talk about the man who walked down the street and he said, I cried because I had no shoes, and Shoeless Joe Jackson reminded me of this, and until I saw a man with no feet.
Absolutely.
And I said, listen, you don't have an extra pair of shoes you wouldn't be using, do you?
Oh, that's so wrong.
That's bad. That was bad. That's bad. That doesn't fly today, today's PC world. You don't get that.
It doesn't. That was.
Maybe we'll take that megaphone away from you and give it to somebody who's deserving.
Well, you know what? John Cleese said that we're being censored so much there won't be any comedy in our future lives. So,
Well, there's no comedy in my present life. Let's put it that way. Be well, everybody.
Okay.
Renee, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.
Best of luck to you, Renee.
Bye.
Bye.
All right.
I appreciate it.
Take care. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Ron. All right. Bye-bye.
This has been a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.